Without further ado, I want to introduce our speakers today. We've got three very well-respected doctors from around the country who have worked across the country, working on different problems, and hopefully we can find some solutions for you. First one, I'll let them introduce themselves. The first one, Dr. Tom.
Hey everybody, I'm JC Chong. I'm at the Clemson University ornamental entomologist.
All right, then we got Dr. Osborne, an entomologist.
Hello, I'm Lance Osborne from the University of Florida. I work at the Mid-Florida Research and Education Center.
And last but not least, Dr. Hausbeck from Michigan State, our pathologist.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name's Mary. I've been at Michigan State University now for just over 30 years. That time has gone pretty quickly. I'm responsible for greenhouse ornamentals and herbs and perennials, and then I also wear the hat of vegetable pathologist. Welcome.
Yes, welcome everybody. I really appreciate you guys for joining, and hope everybody that's on the call can get a little bit out of this today. I'm looking forward to a great roundtable with three experts here. So we'll start it off. We got two different sections, and we'll have a little break in the middle. Since it is a happy hour, we'll have a little break, give you time to take care of whatever needs to be done and get back within a couple minutes in the middle. But we'll try to split it up into entomology and pathology questions. So we'll start with entomology. And the first question, we got questions from everybody who had signed up, over 125 customers and growers from around the country. And we tried to compile the questions together. So the first question comes to us, how do I get the best control when I suspect I have multiple species of thrips, not just Western flower thrip? Can you offer your favorite thrip rotation and frequency of application? So I guess we'll start that out with Dr. Chong and Dr. Osborne.
I guess I'll get started. The most common species, of course, is Western flower thrips, but further south, we also have a lot of different species. And of course, if you have your side vent open, God knows what kind of species you're going to get. Wind blows, they're going to come in, and if your neighbors are cutting hay, there's all kinds of stuff floating in. I think most of the trials that we have done have been conducted in the Western flower thrips. That's a major species that we have in the greenhouse industries. And I think, personally, if you can control Western flower thrips, there's a pretty good chance that you can control other thrip species. So if we are generating most of our research data on Western flower thrips, there's a pretty good chance that, all the other thrip species will be able to control. And that would be my take. I don't know what Lance has to say about that, since he's in the business for a lot longer than I
have. I'm the old fart. Okay. I think I agree with you. The bottom line is we try to manage or do our planning on the most problematic species to control. We did that when we first found chili thrips, and what worked for Western appeared to work fairly well for chili thrips and echinothrips and a few others. So that's kind of the way we put our programs together. Now, just giving a list of the few things that we think are most effective, that might work, but the bottom line is we kind of recommend that you go to one of the websites like IR4 that has a lot of efficacy data and look at some of the things that are working well. You have a list of about 5 to 10 different compounds that work well. Then you read the labels and find out whether they'll work on your crop or they are suited for the site that you're working in, say if it's a greenhouse, and then you whittle the list down to about 4 or 5 different compounds. Then you test for phytotoxicity, and then you can put your rotation together from different modes of action. For example, like pylon's not legal outside, so you'd only have that in your rotation if you're treating inside. So that's kind of the way we do it. There are a number of good compounds. The IR4 site is filled with some really good efficacy data, and I think it was updated for this year just for thrips.
Awesome. Well, appreciate it. Next one comes to us. What is a good whitefly rotation for poinsettias in the finishing stages? And in general, do you have any hints on the best ways to control whiteflies?
You want to start with that, Lance?
Okay, I'll go with that. If possible, well, I mean, basically what we've been doing is screening pesticides for the most difficult whitefly that's attacking poinsettias in the nation, and that would be the Q biotype. And so we've screened all of our chemicals against that particular organism. And then we have a website that lists all of those that have been tested and the amount of control we've gotten. And then we just recently finished some studies where we actually put rotations together, and we use non-neonic materials such as mainspring, Rycar, Altus, Ventigra, and a few, and I think Avid was in there. And then we did every 3 weeks we sprayed with a particular compound and rated them, and we came up with a couple rotations that worked very well for Q biotype, and that was Altus. 3 weeks later, Ventigra. 3 weeks later, Avid. And the other one that worked well was Rycar first. 3 weeks later, Altus, and the final spray was Mainspring. So we know we can control these with non-neonics, and these were the low rates. So every one of these that we just mentioned at their high labeled rate worked very well as a spray. Drenches were a little more problematic. And I don't.
Right. One thing I want to mention about poinsettia is that I always say if you grow poinsettia, there's a pretty good chance you're going to get whiteflies, right? So the whiteflies got to come from somewhere. And a lot of times those whiteflies actually come in with your cuttings. So if there's any chance at all, you can do a pre-plant cutting dip that actually do very well. And last year we did a trial looking at pre-plant cutting dips. Some of the work has been done in Canada by Rose Budenhouse and the group. And what they're showing is that 0.1% horticultural oil or a tank mix of 0.5% insecticidal soap and Botanicard WP actually gives you almost 8 weeks of suppression for whitefly population. That's a pretty long time for it. So our thought is, well, that's Canada. Does it work in the South? And that's what we do. And also this time we also put in Valifer, which is a new product from BASF, also Bovella bassiana, but different formulation. So what we did is basically put it in there and get some poinsettia cutting, dip them just like what they do in Canada, stick them, and sure enough, what we're seeing is that it gives you at least 6 weeks or so of pretty good whitefly suppression. So that basically saves you a lot of trouble at the front end of the production cycle. If later on you can add in a lot of other products like Altus and Mainspring and Rycar and Ventigra, like Lance suggested, those kind of rotation program, you could basically keep a pretty clean crop going forward until finishing.
We had the same results. I think we published a couple papers on dipping cuttings in oils and in some of the insect pathogens. The oils always work better.
And you guys knocked out 2 questions with 1 answer. Good job, man. Another one that I guess many people on this call are probably interested to hear about are some of the best rotations and grower tips to control 2-spotted spider mites in a conventional program. Now this is without any beneficials, so a conventional program, and to avoid resistance.
Right, I feel like we are kind of lucky with respect to 2-spotted spider mite because there's a lot of miticide out there that works very well. I'm working on a rotation trial right now. We haven't had much of a data yet, but what we're seeing is that a lot of time if you rotating some of the the broad spectrum miticide like sultan or fluoramide to really clean up the cycle quite a bit. You actually give yourself a lot more suppression further down the road. So there's really not a right way or the wrong way to do it. As long as you rotate, like I said in the presentation, as long as you rotate, when it comes to mite, as long as you rotate, that's always a good thing. And I've seen several cases of miticide resistant myself already. But as soon as the grower rotate to something else they haven't used before, the problem sort of gone away for the most part.
We basically have had fairly good control with many of our compounds, but most of the issues that we have are
Thanks.
growers just don't get good enough coverage, and they have to make sure getting good coverage. We also recommend some of the worst problems we've had with some of the growers has been that they rotate too much. They put too many compounds in a rotation, and they have some very weak materials in there, and that doesn't allow them to break the life cycle very well, and they just continue to have problems. So 3 to 4.
Dr. Osborne, you there?
Or at the most is what we recommend. Me? Hello?
Yeah, there you are. You're back.
Okay.
All right. And kind of adding to that conversation there, one of the questions that came in, a problem that I see very frequently as I travel up and down the state of Florida is how do temperatures affect the frequency of our miticide and insecticide applications?
Well, if you got, typically if you have a higher temperature, the insects usually develop a lot faster. You ended up having more generation. And that's particularly true with spider mite. So you basically ended up having to, spray a little bit more frequently than usual. And when it comes to rotation wise, that also means that you kind of have to rotate more frequently to a different product. Basically, the rule has always been that you use one mode of action for one generation. That's easy enough to figure out. What do you think, Lance?
Well, it depends on the organism. With mites, it's about a 7-day life cycle when it's really hot here in Florida.
That sounds like he's having some difficulty there. Hopefully it'll jump back on. We'll just go to the next one.
So basically we tell them if they've had, can you hear me?
There you are.
You're cutting off quite a bit, Lance.
Yeah, I don't know. I may have to move my computer somewhere. I'll get
You might have to move it from the
server.
bar to next to the modem or something.
Yeah, there you go. Well,
Okay,
Dr. Chong,
I agree.
all right, Dr. Chong, here's the next one. We see this a lot on different labels and especially on some new chemistries coming out. Expire was just reintroduced into the market with suppression of mites on the label. What does suppression of an insect on a label exactly mean? Is there a threshold you guys work with?
Now that is a can of worm. You really want to open that?
No, I just wanted to see if there was some difference there.
Typically, when we say suppression, it means, for me, it means 80% or less. So, it would be something that I would be very hesitant to use if there's something else available. Something that Lance mentioned earlier, which is, don't rotate stuff. Don't rotate miticide that's kind of weak in there. You want to go in with pretty good stuff. And so if I'm making a rotation program, or if I figure out a spray program, if I see something that is saying suppression on the label, I'll be a bit iffy about that. Unless you really don't have any other choices, you might want to boost it up with something else, tank mixing with something else. That would be my recommendation.
Basically, I take it as it almost doesn't work, so I try to stay away from them.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. Here's another one that was very popular in our 125 questions. Which miticides are best to use in conjunction with a beneficial program? Another hot topic for you.
Well, Lance, you have done quite a bit of compatibility study. What do you think? Well, Lance, jumping in, some of the work that I've done that we have shown for working, miticide actually works very well compatible-wise. Sultan is pretty good. There's just a lot of other products. There are a few things I definitely won't use. Avid would be one of them. Pylon would be one of them. Those stuff you definitely don't want to use if you are doing biological control too much. But if you're looking at compatibility-wise, Sultan works very well. Pretty compatible. Fluoride, pretty compatible. Anything else, Lance? Can you think of?
Well, the only thing, besides the soaps and oils and Sultan, we did find that if you're looking at Swirsky, that a number of the newer compounds that I mentioned for efficacy on whiteflies works fairly well. And they don't interact with that particular predator, but it's case by case predator. Persimmons almost they fall over dead almost the minute you open a bottle of pesticide. Whereas Californicus, there are strains out there that you can spray with Talstar without killing them. So it really depends on the organism that you're using.
Right. I would definitely stress that you kind of need to know. Every time we talk about compatibility, we always kind of lump everything together, but it's much more fine-grained detail than that because every predatory mite species is going to respond differently. Swirsky is a lot tougher than Persimmons, and that's what we have typically seen. That's for sure. And some of the bigger insects usually is a lot tougher than predatory mites too. So it all depends on what you're looking at.
Well, here's another one since you guys are on the predatory mite issue. Somebody asked, is Californicus worth the extra money compared to Persimmons? And why would you pay more for it?
I'll answer that one. I think that it's well worth the extra money. Californicus, in my impression, is probably the best predator out there at this point in time. We've been trying to recommend it and get people to use it for a number of
Lance, you're breaking off again.
years. Now, that said, the ones that are reared on... Anyway, I'll let you take over.
Well, one thing I think, one of the benefit of Californicus, particularly for us in the South, is that it can stand heat a lot better. And that I think is quite worth the money just going into it.
Well, that's a good reason here, especially in Florida nowadays.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Here's another one up there. What are the best options for aerified and broad mite control on roses?
I don't deal with roses and aerified mites. We haven't seen it yet.
Right. We're starting to see a lot more broad mite issue in our area, not just on vegetable crop, but also on nursery crops. So we're starting to work a little bit more with that. And what we're finding, a few of the compounds that we find works very well is, let me look at my notes, is actually Avid works very well. Pylon actually works very well. Another one is actually Forbid or Savat works pretty good against broad mites. Aerified mites on roses, I guess mostly related to the rose rosette disease. Some of the work that's been done in Tennessee, I believe what they're saying is surprisingly bifenthrin actually works very well against them, against aerophyte mites. I need to kind of look at my notes again, but that's what I can remember.
If at all possible, on crops other than roses, broad mites are very easily controlled with Swirsky and Californicus if the temperatures are right. We can't rear broad mites in my greenhouses because of the predatory mites just are too aggressive.
Interesting. Well, since you seem to be doing a good job of growing some aggressive mites there, Dr. Osborne, another question came in is, what is the longevity of beneficial insects, specifically Persimilis? And is there a way to extend their life cycle?
Well, I think you have to look at the population. Individual ones, depending on the food availability and what they go through. I mean, during shipping and all those types of things, the longevity is not very good, okay? But if on a population level, there's things you can do to extend and help the population by feeding them alternate hosts. Persimilis, unfortunately, will only feed on spider mites, but Californica, Swirsky, and a number of the other ones that are available will feed on alternate prey. Some will feed on pollen. We put in pepper plants to feed Swirsky and Californicus and a couple others. So, you know, there's different different types of things you can put into the system. You can buy pollen. There's also some small cysts that are from almost like sea monkeys that you can get that we're looking at, and they seem to work well on certain predators in the greenhouse to extend their life longevity and keep the population at a level that can control the pests that we're trying to manage.
Right, the sea monkey product that the Lance just mentioned, one of the companies they're selling it is BioBee. Some of the data that I've seen is that it works very well to sustain the longevity of Swirsky and also Aureus, and also the Merit predatory bug as well.
Awesome information there, guys. I appreciate it. We had a gentleman ask a question. Tyson was asking, you had mentioned something about temperatures in Californicus. Do you have any ranges for humidity or temperature with Californicus that work the best?
Well, off the top of my head, I can't really, I mean, they seem to do well in interior scapes. They seem to do well in Florida. I don't know how well they do farther north, like in JC's climate.
Right, in my area, they do well in the greenhouse. In the interior scape, they're okay, I think. Much better than Persimilis for the most part. Neither do I remember exactly what is the exact temperature. I think Persimilis has a much lower tolerance than Californicus.
Yeah, this guy was coming from Colorado where the humidity's low and temps are low. So he was asking if there was
he's probably growing a different crop, and it's probably not conducive to some of the predators.
Awesome.
If it's below 50%, it probably isn't going to work very well.
Okay. And lastly here, before we take our break here right in the middle of our happy hour, is there a best time of day to spray for mites? I've heard all sorts of things as I travel. Spray in the morning, spray during the day, spray in the evening. Have you guys in your trials come up with anything that works the best?
I personally haven't seen any difference as far as time of the day. And for me, the one thing that makes a lot of difference on your efficacy really is coverage. How well we can get into the canopy, how well we can get into the bottom of the leaf. That to me means a lot more than what time you spray, or what kind of additive you add to it, what kind of special juice you put in it. It doesn't really matter that much to me. As long as you get it down to the bottom, get a thorough, very good coverage, I think you are solving about half of your problem right there.
I think you open yourself up to phytotoxicity if you wait into the warm part of the day and if you doesn't promote drying. So if it sits on the leaf wet all night long, you're going to have more problems from phyto than you are from the pests themselves.
Awesome. Well, great feedback, gentlemen. And Mary, hope you're ready. So you've got the next section here. So I think we'll take a little 2-minute break. We've got a couple commercials on some new products, one of which everyone will be receiving in their care package. And we'll be back to you here to finish up the last 30 minutes.
Welcome to the WinField United Pro Cultivate Happy Hour. Hope you're all doing well. I'm Kevin Ross, and I'd like to tell you about an exciting new product from WinField United called Jet Shield. Jet Shield is an Armory certified organosilicone, an organic-based organosilicone. Organosilicones are a type of surfactant which reduces the surface tension of a water droplet to help spread the droplet over the plant's surface. Organosilicones are different from other surfactants, like non-ionic surfactants, because of how much farther they allow the droplet to spread, up to 4 times more coverage than a solution not containing a surfactant. That's why they're called super spreaders. Did I mention it was organic? Jet Shield has been tested in lab settings for spread and dry time, as well as mixability with a variety of industry products. In the trials, where the focus was spread and dry time, Jet Shield far outperformed the industry standard products. Did I mention that Jet Shield is Armory certified? Jet Shield is very beneficial when spraying contact products because coverage is necessary to achieve maximum control. When conditions are right, organosilicones have been shown to wrap even to the underside of the target foliage. Imagine the difference in control compared to using either no surfactant or a non-ionic surfactant, which may not spread to the effect of Jet Shield. Even a few percentage points difference in control could mean the difference between a sellable crop and the dumpster. Jet Shield is also Armory certified. Wait, did I mention that already? This means that Jet Shield is organic based and can be used in applications where organic products are necessary. When spraying any product, but particularly contact HIFs, you can feel confident that adding Jet Shield to your tank can create a spray that will give you a quick spread, fast dry time, and help increase control. Excited about this product? Good. A sample is being sent to you. Thanks for joining us today.
This is for all of you. This is the first 3-person roundtable question. How much pesticide resistance do you see in our ornamental market in regards to either herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, or miticides? And if so, do you have any examples you can share?
We see a lot. The only example I have is Pylon. When it was first introduced, one of our local growers thought it was a silver bullet, used it every week. By the end of the year, he couldn't control any of his mites. And we tested it and they were definitely resistant.
Yeah, on the pathology side, I would say one of the examples I've been thinking about a lot is with botrytis. With botrytis, the thiophanate methyl, the 3336 product, which is a good fungicide for a lot of things. It's not a good botrytis material, so almost everything that we have checked in regards to the botrytis being collected from different greenhouses, we're seeing that product not work. We're also seeing with some of the strobilurin products, we're seeing those products not work for botrytis either. Now we have a lot of other good materials for botrytis, so I think we've got plenty of tools, and I would just, suggest not leading off for botrytis protection with, the thiophanate methyl materials or the strobies. And then one thing that we do watch out for is resistance to subdue. Subdue's a really good Pythium material. It's been with us a really long time. When it works great. We've just seen a few isolated cases where it seems that there's like a reservoir of resistant Pythium in some of our ranges. And that once it's introduced in some of these ranges, it tends to stick around for a while. And that's where sanitation can come in and kind of rid a greenhouse of that Pythium that is resistant to subdue. So those are some examples. The powdery mildew, we worry about resistance developing, so we talk a lot about alternating among different fungicides to make sure that, that you're always introducing a new tool so the powdery mildew doesn't get really comfortable and adapt to it.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of tools out there, both insecticide and fungicide. There's really not a whole lot of reason not to rotate at all.
Yeah.
And one other thing I want to add is that, you are the grower locally. I hope your corporate headquarters is not telling you how to do business all the time. And one of the example I will give you is one of the growers that I work with, corporate headquarters tell him to use Avid and Avid only. And guess what? Of course, you're going to get resistance with mites coming out. And they're like, oh, shoot, there's nothing can control it. What do you use? Avid. What do you spray before that? Avid. What do you spray before that? Avid. I was like, what? What in the world are you doing? So I took some mites, bring it back to my lab, spray something else on it. It's like everything else killed it except Avid. So there's a lot of other ways you can actually deal with it. And if the bookkeepers at the headquarters tell you need to use Avid or Avid only or anything only, just do something else, for save yourself.
On that topic, Dr. Chong and all of you, what is pesticide resistance measured as? Is that like a certain percent aren't controlled or nothing's controlled?
There's really not a hard cutoff line as far as resistance is concerned. I don't know about pathology, but for me on the insecticide side, as soon as something doesn't work quite right, it's probably a good time for you to re-examine it, look at your spray program, and see if you are spraying something a little bit too much. What do you think, Lance? Do you have something else you could add to that?
It's pretty much at the grower level when they start to lose control, but then they have to really double check and make sure that if they take a plant and dip it in the insecticide or whatever and they don't die, then they have resistance. But
right. Yep. A lot of time you really need to do the research yourself. And it's not that difficult to do. The simplest thing to do is what Lance is saying. Just dip it in there, take it out, check it a few hours later and see what happened. Or a day later and see what happened. If it's not killing it, then you might have a problem.
Yeah, for us, it's a little bit harder because we're dealing with these microscopic spores that, you need to have magnified. So what we do is think of these little plastic wells or little plastic Petri plates. And so we either make a little bit of a toxic soup, including the specific fungicide that we're testing, or we make a toxic gelatin. It's like Jello plus fungicide, probably not good for shots and tailgates and such, but it's kind of the same sort of, texture and it wiggles the same. And so then you see, are the spores able to germinate? Are they able to grow? And then we talk about individuals. So let's say we collect 50 different samples of botrytis from 50 different plants in a greenhouse. We look to see how many out of that 50 or how many out of 100 are able to overcome the fungicide. And so then, like with the example of the thiophanate methyl and the strobilurin, in that case, out of the 50 or 100, actually we had more like 400. Out of 400, every single one was able to overcome that fungicide. in other cases, like Decree is holding up pretty well. Like we might have had a really, really tiny percent that we're able to overcome, but the vast majority, you know, we're limited by our fungicide soup or fungicide gelatin. So then we look at it that way. You know, we really don't want it to get to the point where you're seeing control failure in the greenhouse, because that's miserable. There's going to be losses. That's really a miserable situation. So we kind of look around and see what's happening with botrytis in small fruit, large fruit, and then we say, well, geez, we better start checking our greenhouses and see what's happening with botrytis in our greenhouses. So ideally, I think we want to be able to alert growers before they start having control failure, that we have to be, you know, mindful of, just like we were talking about, switching up modes of action and not relying on the same fungicide all the time.
Well, Mary, this one's going right for you here. You got the answer to this one. So,
Okay.
What are the best controls for downy mildew on roses in the greenhouse and coleus? We had another question about downy mildew and coleus in Florida.
Yeah. You know, so we are in such a better place today than we were 10 or 15 years ago as far as new fungicides that are available. For downy mildews, I like to think about, there are some products that work really well as a drench and they're quite systemic. And then we have a whole nother group of products that can be applied as a foliar application. And so some of the really good products that can be applied as a drench include Sagobus. And there is a new 2EE label that allows that material to be applied as a drench for downy. You have Subdue that can be applied as a drench for downy. And then you also have Adorn that can be applied as a drench. And while it doesn't list every ornamental specifically, it gives really broad groups. You know, it will say ornamental plants. So, you know, take a look at that label for yourself, depending on the crop that you're interested in. But I would think that for the most part, you should be able to use those products. And then we have a whole, in addition to those materials that do represent 3 different modes of action, we then have a number of other products that are quite good that can then be used to supplement as far as foliar applications. We have Stature, we have Mycora, we have Orvago, we have Segway, we have Fenstop. I mean, we have a really nice group of products. Now, if it were me, I would lead off with a drench series and supplement it with the foliar fungicide products, because that's going to get you really the best level of control. But they're really good. They're really good products. If it were me, I wouldn't rely just on the foliar materials that I spoke to you about, because I would want them used as supplements to those soil drenches. But in combination, I think you'd have a dynamite program.
Thank you. The other one here, I know you spoke about botrytis a little bit. The other one came in here. Do you have a favorite chemical rotation for fusarium in the greenhouse?
Yeah, you know, so fusarium is a tough one. Fusarium, you know, is a problem in ornamentals. And I just want to say fusarium's a problem in a lot of crops. Like, there are different fusarium species, but they're problems in a number of crops. And it's one of those fungi that there hasn't really been, you know, an active ingredient that just knocks it out, that really is like the silver bullet. Like, I can give you silver bullet sorts of things so for so many pathogens, but fusarium is not one of them. And so avoidance and getting in good, clean plant material is always important. Some of the materials that I think have some activity against fusarium would include the thiophanate methyl, the 3336. You know, I said earlier that I wouldn't use that product for botrytis, but I would use it as a drench at the higher labeled rate for fusarium. And then you have Medallion, Emblem, and I think the name may have changed again, Spirado, and that's glutioxanil. And I would utilize both of those products and I would alternate among them. But I don't want to leave you with the expectation that that's just going to be, you know, a rock'em sock'em program. It should be helpful, but really the fusarium's a tough one, no matter what crop you're trying to protect.
Well, here's another one I get asked a lot down here in Florida is, as a grower, how can I distinguish between a bacterial issue or a fungal issue?
Yeah, you know, I thought about that question a lot. And, you know, there are some tricks that people can use without a microscope. You know, if you have a microscope, even like a dissecting scope that doesn't have really high power. I mean, what I do is I take that leaf tissue, oftentimes it's a leaf tissue, and I look right where it's brown to green, and I cut a little square that includes some of the brown and green, and I put it in a droplet of water on a slide, and then I take a straight edge razor and I kind of slice it in the water. I put a cover slip on it and I look for the cells that are streaming out of that cut edge. You know, so sometimes in some cases you can get a similar effect. I'll use my wine glass. I think I'm the only one with an alcoholic beverage from what I can tell. So like, if you had a leaf, oh, thanks. I hate to drink alone, but I will if I have to. So you can take a leaf or a stem and you can cut it and you can put it in a clear glass of water and you can put it in the water and then see if a milky stream comes out. You know, so it's kind of the same sort of thing. I think that's less reliable. It's harder to see, but it's the same sort of thing that I'm going for with a dissecting scope, where I'm looking for like a cloud of bacteria coming out of that cut edge into that droplet of water. Like, you don't need a lot of magnification, but you know, and even if you're trying to use a glass like this, I would get a 10x hand lens. And then you might have to convince yourself whether you're seeing something or not. Sometimes the bacteria won't cross a leaf vein. So sometimes, you know, bacteria, for as much problem as they can cause, sometimes they're just not able to cross a leaf vein. And so sometimes on leaf tissue, it can get a squared off kind of appearance instead of being round, in that round lesion crossing over a leaf vein. Sometimes the bacterial lesion will stop at a leaf vein, giving it kind of like a squared off, like a window pane kind of appearance. So those are some general things to think about.
Awesome. The next one is for all of you. So hopefully Lance is still with us. What is the best time of day to spray when outside temperatures are in the 90s for prolonged periods of time?
Yeah, you know, I think Lance might have gotten to that a little bit earlier, you know, where he talked about trying to spray early in the day before temperatures reach that. So you're not spraying in the evening and having that solution not dry and stay wet through the entire evening. You know, usually with fungicides, I think fungicides tend to be quite safe, but usually you want to apply them when they can dry relatively quickly. And so that's important. So for pathology, you know, that's what I would say. The ECs, you know, sometimes can cause some problems just by the nature of their solution.
Yeah, I would agree. If you are using anything that looks oil-based or EC-based, you need to be extremely careful with those, especially when you have a persistent high temperature. As early as you can, give them plenty of time to dry.
Yeah, I would also be mindful and be careful about mixing. Like, so tonight we might talk a little bit about cocktails, a different little type of cocktail, but sometimes we talk about pesticide cocktails, and people want, sometimes, you know, they want to mix a number of things together. And so maybe under those really extreme heat conditions, you might want to back off on that, tank mixing a lot of things together just to try to ease the potential phytotoxicity given the extreme temperatures.
Here's another one for you. Do you have a preferred product for a pre-stick or post-stick drench on unrooted cuttings?
On the pathology side, I don't. I think that if you want to use a biological at that point, either pre or post, I think that's a really good place to do it. As far as some of our traditional fungicides that would be applied as a drench, I'd almost rather wait till you have some kind of rooting initiated. But otherwise, I would see that as a good opportunity for some of the biorational materials, and there are a number of them that I think would be suitable.
Well, that leads right into the next one is, what is the best way to add biorational products into a conventional chemistry program to reduce resistance?
Yeah, so, we have worked with a number of biorational materials that really work quite well on their own. So I always talk about, back in the days when you could host a party or a potluck, right, that you'd ask everyone to bring a dish. And I think when you're putting together a program, I think of each of those fungicides that are in your program as a guest, and you want to know what dish they're going to bring. Like, what are they bringing to the table, right? I used to joke that, for our tailgates and such, my brother-in-law would always bring really crummy beer. And then he'd look for like good beers that other people have brought. And I'm like, man, should I keep inviting him? Like, he's related, so I have to invite him. But you're kind of evaluating like this crummy beer that he always brings. So my point is, when you're building a program and putting different products in that program, you want them to bring something good to the table. And they can, bringing different things to the table is good, right? Like, that's important. So I want to make sure that, first of all, we're choosing a biorational or biocontrol that all by itself brings something. It offers some level of control. And then, especially when you're first working with the program, I would sandwich it between some conventional products that you know well. So kind of a bit of a sandwich where the two pieces of bread might be conventional products that work well. They bring a main dish to your party, and then as the filling, bring a biocontrol or biorational that also brings like a nice side dish to your party. And then think of that kind of alternating program. I think that could be really quite helpful.
Awesome. Well, one more for you, Mary, before we open it up to some of the questions that are coming in. Is there a risk of resistance with copper-based fungicides?
For bacteria, absolutely. Yeah, for bacteria, like some of our bacterial spots are caused by xanthomonads or pseudomonads. And for sure, that's a big issue, especially on the vegetable transplant side of things where those products have been used a lot. For the fungal sorts of things where you might be using them, I wouldn't worry about it. But for the bacteria, for sure, that's a big issue.
Yes, down here in Florida, they use plenty of those. So,
yeah.
All right, I'll open it up. I've got one question here. I'll start with this, and then we'll open it up to anybody would like to join in and unmute themselves and speak to one of the professors or everybody. So the last one I got came in from Nicholas is, with poinsettia season upon us, are there any new options for Pythium, or in what your opinion, what's the best option for Pythium?
Yeah, so I see that, and they've listed Segway, Subdue, Terrazol, and those are still kind of the mainstays. Terrazol, of course, is similar to the etradiazole that is in Truban, and and the EPA really has not liked the Terrazol or the etradiazole. They're old products, so I kind of worry about that. The Segway, I think, has reasonable control. I would probably rank that lower than Subdue and Terrazol. So then I would put segue as that filling of a sandwich, where I would put it between the other two products. But that's really what we have. We really need some new products there. We don't have a lot, and so some of the biologicals could probably be helpful there. And those products should not bother the biologicals, because those are really targeted to what we call the water molds. And our biologicals are not in that group of water molds. So I think you could interface a couple things there, but yeah, they've outlined the products that we have pretty well.
Awesome. Does anybody else have a question for one of the doctors on call here? Well, luckily for all of you, I got a couple more that I can ask here. But anybody, please, call in if you need anything at all here, and raise your hand quickly. Another question came in from one of our 125 there. What are some good bioinsecticides to use in a fogging system? And is there a way to determine if the biological product is surviving the fogging process?
I think there is a way to test. We're trying to develop a quality control method for the Bavarias, the Bacillomyces, and the other things. I don't think there's anything good to put through a system that's heating the liquid. I think you're probably frying all the spores as they go through. I may be wrong. But what we would recommend is, if you have a plant that's infested with a particular pest, you use the spray on it. You take that particular plant, you put it in a large plastic bag, you seal that bag and let it sit on the bench or in an area where it won't overheat for 2 to maybe 3 days. Then unbag it to see if you see any infected insects.
All righty. I had James from one of our growers down in South Florida. Bacteria is a big issue down there. So what are some of the better options to rotate with copper for bacteria?
That's a tough one. In the ornamental and vegetable world, we have very few. We really just have agromycin as an antibiotic. It's an old label, and you'd have to look at it to see if, there are some limited ornamentals listed on that, and then you have tomato transplants listed on that. And so that's an option, but we don't have nearly the antibiotic options that the tree fruit people have. So then you're looking at maybe some of the hydrogen dioxide materials or some of those sorts of agents. They don't have a residual, so they're not going to be super effective, but they might be helpful. And then take a look at the coppers that you're using. You want to look at the percentage of metallic copper, which can range really, really widely from 4% all the way up past 50%. And so ideally you want as much metallic copper as possible. Keep in mind that some of the coppers also have a long reentry period, so they can have like a 48-hour reentry period for like a Coside 3000, Nordox, and some other materials can leave quite a residue, and Coside can as well, but it has a shorter REI. And so when you look at coppers, I would say they're not all made equally. If you have more metallic copper, you might have unacceptable residue, and you might have unacceptable reentry periods. So there's just a lot of trade-off going on there. And then in Florida, gosh, with the relative humidity, it's so hard to dry things out, because culturally that would be helpful. Bacteria like it warm and wet. They're kind of slimy, right? They really are. They're really slimy. They like it warm and wet. They'll move via water splash, things like that. So anything you can do to move air, dry things out would be really helpful. But, sometimes of the year in your environment, I'm sure it's not even possible. And then short application intervals, like using a copper or something like that every 7 to 10 days is not going to be helpful. You know, on the vegetable side of things, you know, the Florida growers put on some sort of copper or bactericide every 3 to 4 days when the humidity and leaf wetness are high. But if you do that, then you have to look at the different coppers, because most coppers, you know, can be applied every 7 days. So then you'd have to use different copper products in order to get a tighter rotation than that.
And now they're flowing in here with 2 minutes left to go. So we'll see if we can't get it done quickly. Dr. Chong, what is the best rotation for flea beetle control?
We've been working with flea beetle and scratching our head for a very long time. Unfortunately, we probably should start with what actually works for it. There's not a whole lot that works particularly well. Some of the ones that we have a lot of success with are basically orthene, Telstar. We go back to some of the really old stuff. We got some sort of pretty decent control with mainspring, and also Expire give us a pretty decent suppression for the feeding activity. So, you know, that's 4 things that you could probably rotate right there. And the one thing about the flea beetle is that they just keep coming in and hit you hard. So you just have to keep it up, unfortunately.
And we got a couple of landscapers on here as well throughout the country. So do you have any recommendations to control rosette disease, or anything we can do once it's arrived?
Nothing you can do, unfortunately. If you got it, put it out. That's really all there is. What's the advance there, Mary? Do you guys have anything?
Yeah, you know, I just know that there have been some small business grant proposals that have focused on resistance programs. And so long term, like the genetic resistance is going to be the way to go.
Awesome. Well, that ends our time, and it went by very quickly. So I appreciate every one of you guys, everyone for joining on, and thank you, Dr. Osborne, Dr. Chung, and Dr. Hasselbeck for being with us today. I think we got some really good, interesting information.
Yep. Cheers.
Yep. Cheers.
Cheers, everybody. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.